Good afternoon. So I'm Joseph Sloop. I'm the Deputy CIO for Forsyth County. Before that, I was GIO for over a decade here with Map Forsyth. And this is one of the big projects we worked on. And so I've been in GIS for a pretty good while. And so I'm gonna let you hear from Zach too, let him introduce himself.
Hey, my name is Zach Blizzard. I'm the data analytics manager for an economic research center on WSSU's campus. And I've been working with Joseph on various projects over the last few years.
All right. So first I'm gonna take you down memory lane for us, just so I can set the context for what we're talking about today. So a good decade or more ago, we had a revow here in the county. And parts of the county, some of the properties were dropping 50% or more, right? And so as we know, tax can only look at sales and those kinds of things. Well, the county manager came to our department and said, you guys can look at anything. Tell me what's going on, right? Look at any variable you can find, things like that. So we said, okay. So we start off, we're just digging around, and one day, one of the employees called me in his office, we have the dual monitors, and he's like, come here, take a look at this. I was like, okay. He had two maps, and I was like, okay, yeah, you have the same map on both screens. He's like, no, it's two different variables, but the stuff's happening in very similar spots. And so we said, okay, well, let's dive into this a little bit more. Let's see what's going on. Long story short, we ended up with around 26 variables that we collected for numerous years in a row. And what we would do your basic heat maps and things like that. And the idea was to show, okay, this is where stuff is happening. And it usually was the negative things happening, quite honestly, in the county. We presented it to department heads, and the interesting part was they knew that their stuff was happening there, but they didn't put it together that other things were happening there, right? So if I'm in public health, I knew certain things were happening from a public health perspective, but maybe I didn't realize that the sheriff's office had things going on over here too. So we kept this up, and the product really was an overload of maps, right? We love maps. And so we had this PowerPoint, we'd export it out as a PDF, put it on the website, and folks would use it. And they had to scroll through, 26 different variables, right? So at least 26 different maps. And then we had a couple maps where we literally took every one of them and overlaid, and we identified where the variables, so we could say, okay, 25 or 26 variables are happening in this area, and so on and so forth. And then we used community analysts to run some reports for those areas, some different demographic reports and things like that to kind of drill down a little bit. As the project went on, we're like, okay, something's got to give. One, the title was a horrible title. It was called the Distressed Area Project, right? Not a lot of fun with that. So we said, we need to rebrand this thing, first of all. We need to make it very user-friendly, because we're working with a lot of nonprofits who needed this information, because they were taking this information and using it to apply for grant dollars. And sometimes it was cumbersome. Sometimes we'd have to go sit, explain it to them, explain what the heat maps were, this kinds of things. So we said, is there not a better way of doing this? Still providing the information, spinning it a little bit, and putting it back in the hands of those who really need to use it. At the same time, internally, from local government perspective, we were wanting to know if our programs are working, right? We're doing all kinds of programs throughout the county. Are they making an impact? Are we moving the needle? Or is the same stuff happening year after year, regardless of dollars and time we put into different places in the county? So that led us to a partnership with Spatial Justice Studio here. And Dr. Russell Smith leads that studio up. Unfortunately, he's not able to be here today. And so we said, well, let's talk with them a little bit about this. Let's tweak it. So kind of a 2.0. So we rebranded it to call it the Forsyth County Neighborhood Opportunity Atlas. And with this, we wanted to look at opportunities and successes throughout the county. Because if stuff's happening that's a success, can we replicate that in other areas? Or are these successes due to programs that are being implemented through government, nonprofit, churches, whomever, right? And then opportunities, hey, we can build on that. Like if we see something, okay, you know what, we need to focus in on these 3 areas versus everything. The other thing is we wanted a platform for measuring change and trends over time. Again, we have data going back, I think 2010, maybe even sooner. We've had to drop some variables out, but we have a lot of data and we want to use it. We wanted to use this as an opportunity, again, in local government. A lot of times we come and say, hey, I have this great project we want to do this year, and this is what it's going to cost. right? And they're like, well, how do you get to that decision? How can you back that up? So our goal was to make this data help with those budget justifications. The other thing is we wanted to get this out to anyone and everyone who wanted to use it. We wanted people to really make those data-driven decisions that we always throw out, and that the keywords, right? And so we wanted it on a platform in which community, citizens, organizations can use, government can use, everybody can use, open and freely. Okay, so that brings us, do you want this part or the final?
Yeah, I can do it.
Okay, so after that, we partnered with Spatial Justice Studio, and Zach's actually going to take it from here, and he's going to do some demo and talk a little more in depth about the application we have. And if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. We're happy to help. Right.
Sure. So it's basically a tool. We house it on a website, and I'm going to show it in a second, but just like a quick overview. So we created a bunch of different dynamic maps that present a bunch of data from a variety of sources that are easy to navigate and easy to understand. The hope is that we can update it with new data over time to keep it relevant and make it a place where we can actually store data. Because like Joseph was saying, government has so much data that's not easily accessible, but is extremely valuable. So, the census is great. The American Community Survey has a lot of great data, but it's limited though. There's a lot of other variables that they don't track that local governments have access to. That would be great if it could be kind of distilled and maybe presented at a census tract level. So we're hoping that it'll also be a public database where those important variables are contained and made available to anyone that would find it useful. So just really quickly, like I just mentioned, so one of our main goals was to not just rely on publicly available data from the census. We incorporate a lot of variables from that because there are some great ones, but we really tried to coordinate with department heads and Forsyth County. So this is mainly for Forsyth County, to get data that they have, but that no one's really using or that no one is really kind of presenting in a commonly viewed format, like for example, a census tract level. So we have a lot of very unique micro level data that we were only able to get because we had those relationships that we could build and we worked closely with the people that had access to the data. So in addition to the percentages and the counts that we presented at a census tract level, what we wanted to do was we wanted to standardize it relative to the county level. So what we map is we don't map the percentages, we map the Z-scores in comparison to the counties. So that's kind of a nice way to gauge, well, by how much is a particular census tract differing from the overall county average. And the reason that's useful is just because you might compare two census tracts, the home ownership rate differs by 20 percentage points. And that's obviously a big difference, but when you look at the kind of the average variation across the entire county, you can't really tell then if that difference is statistically significantly different. So in addition to the Z-scores, we also give the raw scores just because we wanted to make it very targeted so where the users could quickly see, well, where are things the most different. So really quickly, let's see how this is going to work. So I just clicked on the link. What's the best way to actually pull up the website? Is it just minimize it and then? Hit escape. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, cool. Thank you. All right, so this is kind of the landing page. All right, so really, really cool opening page. Really proud of that graphic. But across the top, you can see a bunch of the different maps are housed under these kind of drop-down titles categorized by topic. So for instance, if you were to hover over the built environment, you might see, you can look and view things like where mortgage foreclosures happening at a higher than average rate across the county. Where are the code and zoning violation rates happening at a higher rate or a lower rate? So those are variables and data that are not easy to get. So those are just a few examples, and I'll show you. But in addition to kind of the stagnant, like single year cross-sectional maps. We also have some county trend maps where you can view things, how are things changing over time, plotted across the census tract. And then we provide some in-depth, information on the individual census tracts. Now, I don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to kind of quickly get to like an example of how someone might want to use it. So let's say, for instance, there's an organization that wants to increase voter turnout in the upcoming presidential election. So one thing they might want to do is they want to look at, well, the voter participation rates across census tracts to see where in Forsyth are registered voters participating at a much lower rate than the rest of the county. So what this is showing is just the Z-score transformation of the active registered voter participation rates from the 2020 general election. So this was data that was collected from the NC Board of Elections. It's not very easy data to get and clean, so it took a while. But you can see right away there's some hot spots. Right on the east side of the downtown area, there's a number of census tracts where voter participation rates are pretty low compared to the county average. So for instance, when you hover over these census tracts, you get a quick small pop-up window. It's probably hard to see on that screen, but you can see that the rate in this tract is statistically significantly lower than the county rate. So just under 60% of those that were active registered voters actually voted from the census tract. So that organization can perhaps maybe design an outreach program to specifically target residents from these areas, and instead of taking like a county-wide approach, this kind of helps them identify hotspots where they might want to look into. Another example might be mortgage foreclosure. So this is plotting the mortgage foreclosure rates per 1,000 mortgage homes. You can see that there's really only one, maybe two or three census tracts that had higher than average mortgage foreclosure rates. So if the Community and Economic Development Department wants to institute maybe a program or an experiment with a program to, maybe try to reduce these foreclosure rates, they could quickly look at this map and see, okay, there's one particular census tract that has a very high rate of foreclosures. Maybe that's a good place to implement this experiment of this program. And one great thing about that is if they were to choose that census tract and we got new data, we could, continuously update this website with new data, and it might actually be a way where they can track to see, okay, are we making a dent? If we invest these dollars, invest in this program that's carried out in this location, did we see a change in foreclosure rates over time? So it's a way to perhaps track and assess, the effectiveness of certain things, or to see how well certain programs are doing. That's a quick overview. Does anyone have any questions or? Hopefully every year. We don't want to go too far beyond at least 2 years. Yeah, so we're hoping to have a big update soon. So all of these variables are going to be updated. And we're also kind of discussing, ways of kind of making it a little bit more dynamic. And so it's very new. It's only a few years old. Any other questions? All right.
So one thing I do want to point out for all the GIS folks is we're not using ArcGIS Online, as you saw. It's very basic. It's Data Wrapper.
Oh yeah, Data Wrapper. That's the software.
And for what we're doing now, it works perfect. It's very simple, very clean, very easy, right? And that's what we were going for. Now, we have been in discussions about, okay, do we migrate this over to ArcGIS Online or something else, right? And we'll be talking about that over the next year. And so one other quick thing, since we still have just a second. We have the Opportunity Index. And I love this map because what it does when you hover over it, remember we talked about three things, three opportunities, and 3 successes. So for each census tract, we've identified those through the statistics Zach has done. And so in this case, 3 things to improve, It has a high disability rate, low elementary EOG math performance, low elementary school performance score. So those are some things that if somebody was doing a program and came to our county commissioners and said, hey, these are target areas which we're working on, and here's the census tract, we're doing it, the elected officials would look at this and see, okay, these are areas that need to be improved in this census tract. Therefore, they're more than likely going to be willing to fund that project. And that's what this is about too, is some accountability in terms of internal projects. Yeah.
Thanks for mentioning that.
Yep.
I just wanted to highlight too. So this index is basically aggregating all of the different z-score comparisons across all of the variables we looked at and providing an overall kind of index indicator showing, what census tracts which ones are kind of experiencing more successes versus opportunities. And I'm glad Joseph brought this up. So like on this map, when you hover over this census tract, it tells you both the top 3 opportunities, like areas for improvement, and then the top 3 areas that are successes. So you can kind of see how they're ranked. So just because, for instance, this census tract is highlighted bright red, so there are areas for opportunities, there are some successes here that are worth highlighting too. So every neighborhood is a little bit different. Every neighborhood might be experiencing slightly different challenges versus opportunities. But I'll also highlight a couple more maps. So we also kind of created now a lot of this was built in conversation with people in the county. So this was a map that people specifically wanted. They wanted to see across tracts and by category across which of the variables are some tracts experiencing successes versus opportunities. So for example, across all of the different variables we looked at, so for example, this census tract, it's experiencing a lot of successes when it comes to the various access and infrastructure variables we looked at. Specifically, it has a very short average distance to the closest park or rec center. So residents that live there are fairly close to a park. This one, for example, one of its key successes, it has a very low vacancy rate amongst the housing units. And all of it, and it changes depending on which census tract you're looking at. So for here, this census tract, very low rate of renters that have burdensome rent payments. And you can look at the same map, a very similar map, except for opportunities. So in addition to the successes, we created a map that you can specifically look at what are kind of the top areas where, people might want to focus on. So for instance, this particular census tract, very long distances to grocery stores. High overall crime rate. So that's a quick overview. Any questions? Okay, there's 3 in here. Okay. Right. So we kind of, there's a program that actually looks at the ranking of all of the variables and just selects the top 3. So yeah, it didn't require a program. It's pretty straightforward. It could just be a simple query or something. Hey. So that information is tracked. I'm sorry, I can't tell you. If Russ was here, he would know. But we're just now starting to kind of plan the rollout phase for it to actually be,
So one of it's going to be a requirement of county departments to use. When we're done, I have a budget item or any kind of money request, I have to reference back to this. So it'll be how you always have to type up these resolutions and stuff. So at least from that standpoint, we know the kind of thing. Was there another question?
So I think so. So yes, so for this particular census tract, across all of the variables we looked at, when it comes to the best areas for that census tract where they has maybe the highest score, those are the top three. That's how it's ranked.
Any,
So that was something we kind of came to in discussion with department heads. That was kind of their preference in terms of the geography. They wanted it at the census tract. We could have gone to the block group, but one of the issues, especially when using American Community Survey, is the margins of error. They go out, they're huge. So it's sort of a trade-off. You can get some. Do you disagree? They get quite large, I guess, relative to the census tract estimates. So it's a trade-off between, I guess, you know, that was something I would have liked to have done at the block group, but, you know, it's a trade-off between the variance of the estimates and, yeah, that's a good thing.
so one thing for those folks wanting to know kind of the back end, everything we did is if you go to the about, and there's a place, and we have documentation where we literally, Zach painstakingly typed out literally every formula, everything we did, how we kept everything apples to apples. I mean, if you can't sleep one night, read this. It'll knock you out, I promise. But again, we want to be very transparent with how we did this. It wasn't just, poof, here you go. Enjoy the magic, right? Because we do have some elected officials who have PhDs in mathematics and things like that, and they're the first to question it, right? And so this was my first slide when I was presenting this, was like, this is for you. Like, go read this. So, okay. Go enjoy your snacks. Have a good one. Thank you.